hopefully it'll fix itself in a minute. So I apologize for how weird my thing looks. But as Commissioner Smith said, the continuous improvement advisory committee report is something that was legislatively mandated through House Bill 2017, both to go to the commission and then also to the legislature, to make sure that they were kind of tracking the work that the CIAC was doing. And I think from my perspective, although I'm open to others' thoughts, also being able to hold us as an agency kind of accountable to the work that was coming out of the CIAC. So it's not just us reporting out every month on certain things, but also how are we actually taking tangible steps to take the feedback from this group and actually put it into action. And so I think hopefully folks got a chance to review the draft report, and I would love to have just a conversation and any feedback from folks. This is obviously my first one looking at this report, and I think what we tried to do was really encapsulate all of the work that happened over 12 meetings in both 2022 and 2023, and being able to both summarize that and then provide some response and kind of what the actions were taken as a result of the CIAC feedback. So I think I won't dive into every single one. If there are ones that folks want to talk about, we can definitely do that. I think just from a high level, my big takeaways in this were one of the big pieces that you all engaged in over the last 18-24 months was around having conversations about our KPMs and wanting to make sure that we are hitting the right mark in some of those KPMs. And I think that one of the things that the report reflects is that in specific areas, and I know Amy Joyce is here too, but specific areas in DMV, in walking and bike path recommendations, and in some of our climate conversations, there were direct impacts to how we were looking, measuring, defining our KPMs as a direct result of the conversations that occurred in CIAC. So that is reflected as, I think, the first part of the report. And then I think when you kind of dive into it, we list out topic by topic each of the areas that were brought to the CIAC in transportation electrification, social equity, project delivery, the major project reports that come back, the robust conversations you all had around cost estimating, work around ADA, and then work around data stewardship. So all of those are kind of summarized within the report, again, around what the conversations were and then how we are as an agency are leaning into those. I will say, just from my perspective, I think that there was a lot of really good work that has come out of this body. I think that I'm hopeful that kind of as we move forward, that maybe there's a more robust, maybe more real-time reporting kind of availability around kind of how the direct feedback is kind of working into the day-to-day things that ODOT is working on. So I will just pause there. I think we had a couple of discussion questions wanting to make sure that this report accurately reflected the work that you all have done over the last couple of years, and if the report is hitting the mark on kind of the right level for delivery and content. So I will pause there, but I'm happy to kind of dive into it more detail as folks want, or open it up for discussion. And Commissioner Smith, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
Sure. I think this is I think it's a good summary of encapsulating what kind of the work we've done over the last couple of years. I think there are a few things in here that resonate with me, which I'll get to in a minute, but I agree with you. It'd be nice if we could work more into the feedback loop of some of the implementation of some of the recommendations, and they're reflected in the report, but I don't know that we have a very good way of or we haven't been consistent in getting a response from the team back. We hear, oh, these are really great ideas. We're going to take these 2 or 3 nuggets and run with them. And then we haven't figured out, I think, a good tempo for getting a report back on the agenda. So one thing that comes to mind is, I think, like, for example, in the electrification, one of the, I think the recommendations that came from the committee was we would like to see Oregon exceed the minimum standards for some of the amenities that we are anticipating at some of these stations. And I think that was a strong recommendation. The federal government has, the highway has, here are the minimums that you need to include in your stations. And we were wanting to see that be a little bit broader. And so I think that is being reflected, but I don't know that we had any kind of real-time reporting back from our climate office saying, here are the things that we're going to put in our RFP. And so I think I'd like to be able to do that a little bit more robustly than we have before. And that's one example. And I think the other is, I'm kind of hearkening back to Amber's continuous comments, which are, make sure you tell your story to the community, make sure you are doing getting the story out. And I think we're starting to do that in several areas. I think cost estimating is a good example for that. But it'd be nice if we had a feedback loop where we hear from our team, the ODOT team, here's what we have done in trying to get that story out. And so rather than have it just be in a report, it kind of is embedded in kind of the ongoing work that we do. So those are some of my high level thoughts about it. I'd love to hear from the rest of the group and whatever resonated with you or thoughts that you have of what we are missing or what we could add. Just whoever feels like talking.
Yeah, I agree. I think I was kind of amazed when I heard Leah mention all the topics we covered over these last 2 years. So I think that's significant. Feels like we've hit our stride around that. We've done more lately than we did initially. I wonder if, to that end, Sharon, have we been explicit enough, or does the ODOT staff think we've been explicit enough on what our recommendations are after each meeting, or are we all throwing so much out that you're trying to pick which things are doable and then you go from there from a staff standpoint? Maybe we need to be more formal in our note summary of our meetings to suggest key things and then ask for a response to each of those.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I kind of like to hear from the ODOT team if they feel like we are being specific enough, or if there's a better way for us to communicate. And maybe Mac, you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't get to my hand raising fast enough there. I think Paula, as you were describing that thing that comes to my mind, like ADA and cost estimating are 2 examples where we got some really good feedback from the CIAC on those topics. And I think rather than asking Sabrina or the other CIAC members to put that summary together, I almost feel like we could pivot it back around like what we do when we do legislative testimony, where we circle back to the committee with, here were the questions you asked and here's our responses to it. I wonder if we could take that same sort of tact, because we are tracking the feedback we get from all of you, right? And we are incorporating, I would say, most of it, right, if not all of it, into our work. And I wonder if we can just close that feedback loop. And I think, Sharon, that's a bit to what you were speaking to earlier of how do we formalize that, but maybe not in like an official report, but in a due out back to this committee. So I think there's something we could do as an agency around what did we hear? How do we summarize that? Because honestly, for those two examples, my team was doing that, right? As they're watching this or participating in it, or frankly, watching the recording of it to make sure we didn't miss anything. We're capturing those pieces. So I think there is something we can do.
And I think we did have some times where we had that feedback loop where there was, you know, an agenda item on a subsequent meeting. I know we did it. I'm just not sure that we've done it consistently. And, you know, I think we're also, the committee itself is evolving. We've got some new personnel and, you know, it's a natural that we're going to have some, you know, development of our pace and our cadence with that. But I think keeping in the back of our mind, you know, in agenda setting, also, how do we recapture some of that so that I will internalize that and try and make sure that gets woven into our agenda as we go forward.
I think there's a lot of new issues that pop up in some of these things we've discussed. And it'd be great if we could hear some of that feedback of, hey, we got into the electrification and these are some of the things nobody had thought of, and this is what we're running into. And so this is where we stand today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think this committee has changed, you know, pretty substantially over the last couple of years. So I think we're getting deeper into some of these topics and being able to circle back now that we've had an in-depth discussion for future meetings to say, okay, yeah, let's have the NEVI group come back and where are we in that process? So I think we're doing a little bit of that, but I think will be helpful when we look at setting the agenda for next year. What are those topics that we are all interested in getting a report back on? Jonah, welcome. Any thoughts from you?
No, I'd love to hear more about where we are with NEVI. And also want to make sure that the recommendations we're making are like actionable and not just like a mountain of additional crap that staff has to do. So
Yes.
I want to be thoughtful about that. And to the extent we can provide themes that can be kind of adapted to all the different topics, I think so much the better. Like, for example, storytelling. That's the sort of thing that can be and should be really brought to every topic that we're talking about.
Yeah, I think another theme that we've seen woven throughout our work is making sure that we are embedding equity in decision making, you know, not just ticking the box, but when we're planning a new program, when we're implementing a program, how are we
The one where
Yeah, I mean, at its best, in my opinion, equity and sustainability are part of like they're embedded in all parts of the business, and there's a lens put on everything you do with sustainability in mind or with equity in mind. And they're not separate departments like over there doing stuff.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, it occurs to me, one of the topics that we probably want to revisit again, because we had a really great conversation about the data management and stewardship, which we had a great introduction, but we really haven't touched on that one since we had that in-depth meeting with our new data manager, who's now probably been with us for
Like 2 years or something.
2.5 years, right?
Yeah.
So, and there was a lot of lead time to get the work going. So it'd be nice to know, how is that really going? Because it was a huge mountain of new opportunity.
Yeah, and I think once like we have an understanding of the data that ODOT has access to, I think that makes like baselining different things much easier. And then it also makes working with other agencies really like it makes all other policies throughout the state better. Like the CPUC, or not the CPUC, the OPUC can have access at that point to EV adoption data in sort of more real time, maybe, you know, and I'm just thinking of an example that's sort of in my world, and then can understand if their estimations for EV adoption are accurate or if they're way off. Spoiler alert, like they're way off. But you know, I think having that data and sharing it between sister agencies could be really useful for the state generally.
Yeah, and I think, you know, another example is the ADA ramp program. I think one of the key recommendations that came out of this committee, and I think it was Paula, was to develop kind of a comprehensive revenue and funding strategy rather than just piecemealing it. And my understanding that, you know, we managed to accomplish that. I'm not sure that we could take all the credit for it, but a spark of an idea. And that, I mean, it is a huge lift, which we now actually have a handle on how we're going to get it done. So that might be another topic. Maybe Mac, you have some thoughts about that in terms of what would be a good cadence to bring that back. Is it ripe for a report of here's how it's going?
Yeah, and for what it's worth, that topic, so the one that's on front and center in my mind of like really good feedback from this committee that helped inform our strategy, which then the OTC implemented. And I think back to the how do we close the feedback loop, right? It very much informed that. And I think Sharon, the thought that comes to my mind on ADA, we are going to be doing an update at the OTC in January. And so we need to do that for a couple other reasons. So I think certainly we can bring something back to the CIAC if it fits, or if having it at the OTC is a better place, but we can work through that through the next year. It's a topic that I think is ripe for continuous improvement always, and it's a huge body of work that we're delivering over the next 9 years. So and it's going to be a topic in many circles for a while.
I saw a blurb on today about maintenance and they're out of money and they're not going to be able to plow. And I know that's a current event, but it'd be great to get an update when something like that big hits the news. Because people come to you and say, what the hell's going on? And that is kind of a big thing when they're saying, well, we can't plow 3 times a day anymore, maybe once. And we just don't have the people because we can't hire people and so on, and just get kind of an update on what's happening currently.
Yeah, you know, I think that is actually an offshoot of the tell the story message, because we have been grappling with the shortfall in maintenance and operations funds for years now, and finally I think are starting to tell the story, because we need to, you know, we started at the last legislative session trying to tell the story to a whole bunch of new legislators about how transportation is funded and what the challenges are. And now I think that discussion, that story is needing to go out to across the state of Oregon, so people understand why there needs to be additional funding for maintenance and operations, because until people realize it's going to impact them, you know, it's like, well, you have plenty of money, what, just don't talk to us. So I think that is going to be a continuous discussion over the next couple of years, especially as we head into the legislative session. And I think maybe that's another really good topic for us to how do we advise ODOT and the OTC to garner the support for a legislative ask. And that's something that this committee, I think, could really have some creative ideas about.
I'd be interested in, on that topic of asset management or performance or pavement and preservation and maintenance, but are we at ODOT but approach to both of those things? And can we tie it back to KPIs and performance management in a way that the legislature believes and gets, so they can
You kind of cut out a little bit there, so we missed the first part of it. If you could maybe recap.
Sorry, I'm probably choppy, but I'm interested in whether for preservation and maintenance, ODOT uses a performance-based approach, that for this amount of money for maintenance and the different maintenance activities, this is the outcomes you'll get based on the needs in the system, so that there's a better tie to the budgeting and performance on the road. Is that done today, or is that an area that perhaps we could discuss?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one, Paul. It's a great question. We are far better positioned for that on the preservation of the system. So pavement conditions, bridge conditions, traffic signal condition, right? The performance of the things on the system. We're behind when we think about a key performance measure for operations of the system, right? So capability of snow plowing, to Ted's point, or incident response, and how we're staffed to remove and clear incidents on the system so that it's operating more effectively. So that is a lot of work that we're doing as we gear up for this funding package conversation, is how do we get better metrics for what I'll call maintenance and operations, where the asset management, right, the system of things like pavements, bridges, culverts, we're far better positioned for that as an agency to speak to it. But yeah, significant effort going into that maintenance performance measure piece.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a really great idea, Paula, to the extent that maybe that's ongoing work. Maybe that would be a good topic for us next year to talk about what are the right performance measures for operations. And Mac, it sounds like that is an internal discussion ongoing. You know, at what point would that be a topic that might be far enough along that it would be useful for this committee to take a look at?
Yeah, I think, Leah, I'm looking at you. I think some of the work we're all doing internally, I think we can certainly talk about what the right timing for that will be. But we've got a lot of work underway internally around all of that discussion, funding package, the need, the KPIs, the tying our performance to our budget, kind of all of that. But and there'll be a sweet spot, I think, that would make sense to bring it to this group. But Leah, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I so appreciate the question. I think just for me, it's all encompassing. I think, as Commissioner Smith said, and I think somebody else said too, right? Like, we are actively teeing up as an agency to go in for a 25-27 funding package ask. And I see the role of this group as so crucial in not only understanding the problem, but also in then working through not necessarily solutions, but I really tie it back to the ongoing conversations around what the storytelling is and how are we measuring, and being able to like land that in some sort of kind of baseline. So I will say that one of the things that we have been working on for the past few months is, and I don't know really what to call it, we're calling it like our data dashboard. And we're looking at having some sort of online tool platform to be able to tell the story better about how are we actually doing, where are we delivering, where are we not delivering, and why, and kind of being able to back that up in a way that makes sense to both us internally and the general public, which is really challenging when you're trying to both talk internally and externally. But we're still struggling through it internally right now, just kind of what the development of it looks like. But I definitely would love to bring that back to this group to have a conversation about, even go through maybe a mock-up, as we're hoping to have one in the next couple of months. But I really do see value in that, if that's something that you all would be interested in leaning in on.
Yeah, I like that idea. It's kind of fitting that the recap of a report is looking where we've been and then thinking about what we're going to do next, which is very helpful because we're going to be starting agenda setting for next year and next month or so. And so this has given, I think, me at least some ideas of what we might want to include for next year. And maybe that's a good opportunity for us, you know, other people in this group. What other topics are, you know, are things that we think might be good to add to next year, if you have any thoughts about that.
I'm just saying, I think it's really important to, when you're thinking about like, I mean, you guys know this and you have government affairs folks, but like, when you're thinking about your legislative ask, like always really like giving the context in a few sentences in that one pager that you create around the ask, and really distilling it down to a few, you know, a few key messages around like, what are we trying to say? Like, what is the story we want to tell here? And you know, acknowledging policymakers have, you know, attention spans of like a goldfish, and, you know, you have three to 5 bullets. Like, how can we really tell the story of what we're trying to do, why we're trying to do it, and why we need what we're going to ask for? And and how can we like, you know, lead the horse to water? Like, how can we make sure that they have the resources they need should they be looking for them, and make it really accessible to a lay audience? I think those things are all really, really important.
Yeah, there's a lot of really hot topics out there these days, and maintenance and operations for ODOT is not a very compelling
Well, it's
point.
not, but having worked at, so here's my theory.
Yeah.
Okay, I worked at utilities for 12 years, and utilities are always trying to like tell their story. And my theory on this was that like nobody wants to think about their utility until the lights go out or their hot water goes out. And then they're like, where the hell's my utility? And I think the same can be true for ODOT, right? Like they want the roads to be in good shape. They want the snow to be plowed. And like they want us to be in the background, not thinking about us until something goes wrong. And then they're going to be like, where the hell is ODOT? And so it's like figuring out how to like walk that line. Like, how do you sort of demand attention to say, we need you to think about us for 2 seconds. We know you don't want to, but what we do is really important to your everyday life.
Yeah, no, I
Anyway.
think that's a key point. And how do you tell that story? What's the hook to get people to say, oh, yeah, that's really important. We really need to talk about it.
I think what's most important is to not use jargon. Like at Northwest Natural, I remember like the marketing team would like talk about like the number of therms you would save. And I was like, I've been here for 8 years and I don't know what a therm is. Like you can't talk about therms. No one cares about therms. And so I think like reducing the jargon and really distilling it down so that you're like explaining to a bunch of kindergartners, like, why is ODOT important to your everyday life? Why do like every day you don't even know it, but you're using ODOT's like hard work, and like the maintenance that we do is crucial. And if we didn't maintain it, oh my gosh, it would be a mess. Like, it's like things like that I think are sort of, it's so elementary, but that's like where I want to start storytelling so that you generate sort of interest and care in what we're asking for.
I just want to say I so appreciate that. It's like, and Mac has heard me say this a bunch because it's like stuck in my head. Like, ODOT provides a level of customer service that people don't understand is a level of customer service that they expect, right? Like, we mow the right of way so that it doesn't catch on fire, right? Like, it's that simple. And if we stop doing that, people would say, oh, I need this, right? So it's like, it's really trying to tap in. How are we going back to the storytelling? How are we telling that story? But we are customer service in a way that it just doesn't resonate quite yet because we don't have the right language in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the one thing that seems to be on top of mind for a lot of people, which we need to figure out how we want to tackle, is the whole increase in traffic crashes and serious injuries and fatalities. I mean, and unfortunately, I don't think that can be tied to our infrastructure or maintenance and operations as much as it is people don't remember how to drive. But at some point we have to have that. I mean, we need to figure out how do we weave safety and you know, avoiding serious injury, crashes and fatalities into our discussion, because that's what people are going to ask about. You know, they're going to say, great, maintenance and operations, but how are you going to stop people from getting hit by cars and dying?
Are you talking about like, I mean, in my mind, it's like you can start with safety and then expand that to maintenance, right? Because like you have work zones and you need drivers to be like more conscious of where they are and where workers are and how fast they're going. And so to me, it's sort of a straight line. And yeah, I just want to agree that people are terrible drivers.
Well,
but
Not
I
me,
think
but
we
like
start-
other people.
I think we start this conversation in the schools.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that the schools, at least here in the Portland area, have kind of pushed anything with craft or people who aren't going to college out, and they don't want to hear from them. But it's really the place we need to get back into and talk about what the jobs are and why they're so important. And that's the age that the kids really hear about things. They may never come to work for ODOT, but if they understand what ODOT's doing and what the job is, how important it is, it sticks in their mind. So as far as bad drivers go, I don't think there's a cure. There is one, but they won't let me do it. So, but it's, and I do give driving lessons. Every time I drive, I give a lot of driving lessons. So I have to admit that. But that's where I think we have to go if we're going to reach people, is get back into the schools.
I don't know. I mean, I agree with that, Ted, but I also think that like ODOT has a lot of other avenues that it has access to educate people in, like, given everyone's short attention span. So like we have rest stops. We could put up signs at rest stops. We could make games at rest stops that, you know, people are looking for stuff to read in the bathrooms at rest stops. There's like whoever's doing ODOT's Instagram account is great. Like there are different places where you can provide like little bits of knowledge to people while they're captive, you know, waiting to buy a cup of coffee or something at an ODOT location. And I think we should take advantage of that. And I think we could think about like, what are the like 6 vignettes or 10 vignettes that we want to educate people on, and start distributing those messages around and sprinkling them around where people are.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I really like the rest stop idea. And how do you sprinkle the message? And you know, we do a lot of reader board signs, you know, and maybe there's an opportunity there. I know it's going to sound kind of silly, but we have a place in Canada. We come to Canada a lot, and when you see the reader board signs in Canada, a lot of times they say, please slow down. And I mean, and then thank you. And so that's just that seems like a really weird, small thing, but it's like somebody asks you to please slow down and thank you. Maybe that's not a bad thing.
Well, the Give Us a Break ads that we ran years ago, working out, we saw people pay attention to that and slow down going through the job sites. You know, cell phones are probably the worst thing that ever came to us as far as doing highway work, because people are on their phones or not paying attention. But that ad, give them a break, they're out there working. Really, it resonated with a lot of people, and you'd see people slow down. Europe, they changed the striping to an orange striping through a project and get people awareness. There are a lot of things that they do that I think we could do, and just try to get people to drive better, smarter. So, but I like your idea, Shannon. Anywhere we can put that up, it'd be a great idea, and just to grab attention.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I think we're running a little over time on this topic, but we'll definitely circle back to it. I think we got some great ideas. Just kind of wrapping the bow. Anybody have anything that they would like to see changed on the report or added? Because it's gonna go forward from here. This is your chance. Okay. Great discussion. Thanks, everyone. Let's transition to Amy. Welcome, Amy. Thank you for being here. And I'm gonna just turn it over to you.
Great, thanks a lot. Chair Smith and members of the committee, my name is Amy Joyce and I'm the administrator of the Driver and Motor Vehicles Services Division of ODOT. You invited us, Chair, to join you all at CIAC several months ago, and at the time DMV was in the news for a negative thing. Sorry, I just lost my screen. Hold on, there we go. It was a negative thing that was impacting a small number of Oregonians, but in a significant way. But before we dig into that, if it's okay, I'd like to take a few minutes and just provide some foundational information about DMV. I'm pretty sure this is the first time we've appeared before the CIAC, and probably other than your personal visits to a DMV, probably don't know much about us. So I'll take that time if I may.
Sure.
So next slide, please. So DMV is made up of about 870 employees. Roughly half of us are in the 60 field offices across the state. The other half are in headquarters, answering phones, doing back office and processing, policy work, IT systems work, etc. And we also house so many of the things you were just talking about with Leah. I'm just very excited about because so much of it speaks to what I'm going to talk about. So another part of us is our transportation safety office for the agency. These are the folks who are focused on the behavioral side of trying to reduce fatal and serious injury crashes. Transportation safety used to be its own division at ODOT. They came over to DMV about 2.5 years ago. So DMV's mission up on the screen there, this is sort of what we do, right? We promote driver safety, we protect the interests in vehicles, and we collect a whole lot of money for the state transportation system. So we do some other things too, but those are the biggest buckets. But that's the work. What I like to say to new employees, to all our employees, until they can repeat it without me prompting them, is DMV exists to serve Oregonians. We are a customer service organization. So just quickly some data, because I think sometimes people don't recognize the volumes of things we do at DMV. So we serve about 9,000 or 10,000 customers every day in our field offices, 1.7 million phone calls per year. We process about 1 million vehicle titles and 2 million vehicle registrations every year. In the 21-23 budgetary biennium, DMV received about $1.2 billion. About 1/4 of that went to our own operations. The other 3/4 went to the transportation system and other entities that are non-DMV. So I like to say we're a profit-making organization by design. So that's just a little bit about DMV. Next slide, please. So now to the driver records issue that prompted our visit initially. So in 2023, again, in the news for the wrong reasons. And here's what happened. Some customers were showing up in DMV records as having their driver's license suspended when under the law, they should not have been. And this resulted from a law that's been on the book for decades that basically says when somebody commits a very serious traffic crime, and they are incarcerated, whether local jail or go to prison, they get their license suspended, but that license suspension doesn't begin until they're released from incarceration. And effectively, DMV didn't have a good way to figure that out. What we relied upon is the person coming to us, turning in a form that had been signed by their parole officer or the court saying, this is the date I was let out of prison. So this is how long my suspension should run. So obviously that didn't always happen. So the person's suspension period should have run out eventually. And it should have said that they just didn't have driving privileges. But on our records, it says suspended. And that's a very different classification, especially if you get pulled over by a police officer while you're driving, showing up as not having driving privileges is very different from it saying that you will have suspended driving privileges. So while this was a relatively small number of Oregonians, it really was a big impact. So we took a project on to review all of our records in this realm. They're called never-ending suspensions. And we discovered about 3,000 people who maybe should have, were in a category of folks who might need their record corrected. We went through every one of those individually in partnership with Department of Corrections and the 36 local jails to figure out whether that never-ending suspension was accurate, or if they had been released and we needed to calculate when their suspension ended. And we did that with all 3,000. All of those records have either been verified or corrected. And I want to stress, this was incredibly meticulous, detailed work. A single case could take many hours over the course of days working in partnership to get these things corrected, because some of these records went back literally decades.
How many folks did you have working on that?
We had, it was mostly one individual.
Oh my gosh.
And the reason is, this is very complex, challenging work. And then partnering with, again, 37 different entities, right? The 36 counties and Department of Corrections. And sometimes, just trying to get people to respond from those entities, sometimes getting one answer and then later getting a different answer, like all the things that happen with records, right? So, but we had our very top expert was the person working on it. So then we started having corrected all of those, and we have a system in place now to keep those current, right? Because people continue to get convicted, go to prison or jail and be in the situation, but we have a system now to exchange records. So what we've done too is seeing that, we need to look more deeply at our suspension records more broadly. So we've started a project with that one individual, our top expert, and then we brought back a retiree who has a ton of expertise in this area to start going through records and starting with the ones that would have the most potential impact on an individual if we got the record wrong. So they're going through these things and verifying records. And so this is going to be a long-term project. There are hundreds of thousands of Oregonians with a record that's suspended, but we're starting with those most significant ones and drilling down from there.
So help us understand what this new level is. Is this to get at people who may have been not actually suspended, but were somehow ticketed for having been suspended, so we need to clean up their record and expunge them, or
yeah. So Chair Smith, so that was mostly focused on that, and that group of 3,000 that I talked about, and then working with courts. And we've been hearing from courts in terms of reversing convictions and things like that. The new project is more focused on, I'll give you an example. So there's a statutory program called habitual offender. If you get a high number of certain kinds of tickets, convictions, right, you become a habitual offender, and then you have a very long suspension or revocation period. So we're going back and looking at every one of those. It's very complex, all the different kinds of convictions, different numbers that add up to an habitual offender. Let's go through and make sure we did those right from the get-go, and then fixing those if we got them wrong. So that's an example of where we're focusing, and then correcting them as we go through.
Are there other instances beyond like suspension because of incarceration that the DMV might not be tracking accurately, or that might be hard to make sure, like,
Yeah.
Because I imagine if this exists, there's other issues potentially.
Right. So the direct answer to that is yes. There are instances where this can happen. And what I'll say is this: we have human beings entering information into our system. Some of this is automated. We have an electronic connection with some courts where they upload information. It just goes straight into the system, but much of this is done by individuals. So human beings make mistakes. And so that's, when we, I'll speak a little bit about sort of root causes and how we're doing what we're working on to fix some of these things. So some of the things we need to think about, beyond the incarceration thing. So there's a piece of legislation to try to narrow how many of those really happen and make it more efficient for courts and DMV. So that's one thing. But I think too, we have to think about how we do this work. If I look back 3 years ago, we had, coming out of the pandemic, we had enormous backlogs at DMV. And we were, DMV is always a bit of a production mindset, right? Where there's a bit of a factory floor aspect to the DMV in the back end. And so we sometimes get into a production mindset, and we need to be really thoughtful about when there are things that we are working that can impact people's lives like this. We need to be balancing quality with volume, right? We need to find a way to start quality checking this stuff more frequently. We need to figure out a way to better train our staff, give them better tools. And I think too, we really need to think deeply about the classification of employee we have doing this work. So DMV is a very mature / old organization, right? With processes and systems and ways of doing things that go back decades and decades, right? And so as things accumulate and change over time and sort of everything becomes more complex, is the people we have doing this work, are they the right classification? In other words, do they have the right skills, decision-making authority, right, to do these things? And that's a real question we are going to be asking ourselves, because this isn't, some of this is mere data entry, but some of it is not. And so who do we have doing this work? And we need to have a serious conversation about that. So those are some of the things we're doing. And we're going to be doing a really comprehensive program review for the whole sort of suspensions, driver's records area of the DMV, to just look from sort of soup to nuts. How are we doing this work? Are we doing it appropriately?
So I see Paula has her hand up. Maybe we can pause for a second and.
Thanks. Well, what's the difference between suspended driver's license and you said something about driving privileges?
Yeah.
I don't get the distinction.
Yeah, understood. So think about a suspension is you had driving privileges and you did something wrong or bad, and so they were taken away. That's a suspension. No valid operating privileges is you just don't have the right to drive, period. So think of a 16-year-old who hasn't gotten their permit or their license yet. Okay, they have no valid privileges. It's a legal distinction that's important. If you get pulled over and you're driving with no privileges, that's a ticket. I think it's a pretty small potatoes kind of an offense. If you are driving while suspended, that can be a very serious offense, up to the level of being felony driving while suspended and resulting in incarceration. So it's a legal distinction, but the basic difference is you did something very bad to cause us to take away your driving privileges. Okay, so that's really the summary then on the records piece. Happy to discuss that more if we want to talk. I had a couple more things on some of the stuff that we're doing in terms of service and
the only comment I have, and first of all, thank you for giving us the update, and I really appreciate all the hard work that you and your team of one put into it, and I can imagine how challenging that was to try and get through all those 3,000. And it sounds like you're also trying to think proactively, where are the other potential holes in our system, which is really kind of what this committee is interested in. How do we prevent something like this DMV blowing up? I mean, the suspension issue blowing up in the future. And I think that speaks to your trying to get the right people and be less of a production and more of a thoughtful, how are we doing the work that we're doing, and empowering your employees to say, hey, you know what, if we do it this way, there's going to be people are going to get dropped out of the system. And how do we then kind of create that culture of raising an issue before it becomes a problem?
Mhm. Is that
I just want to acknowledge really something really quickly, Amy. Like, the thing that's really thankless about like the work that ODOT does is that if you do everything perfectly and you hit a grand slam home run, like, nobody's going to write a story about it in the Oregonian. Like, like, if you do everything well, there's silence, and it's like one mistake. And so I just want to acknowledge that, like, the enormous amount of work that goes into like making sure that everyone who's driving is accurately reflected in the system as being able to drive. Like, it's an enormous amount of work, and like, in my mind, fairly thankless. And then I go back to like, how can we tell the story of like what a massive like mountain of work this is? Like, are there opportunities at the DMV? I mean, I've been to the DMV a few times. People wait in line. Can we have storyboards up telling the story there, like about anything the DMV does or that ODOT does? Anyway, sorry, that's my little like rant.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Shauna. And I think it's the nature of public service. I think for all of us, right, whether we're at ODOT or DMV or other government service, it tends to be when you worked in utilities, right? You can do everything 100% right, and it's crickets, right? And then it's when something goes wrong that your phone lights up and legislators light up, or whoever. So I appreciate that. Yeah, I think there are those opportunities. I don't know that it's necessarily the records piece. I mean, quite honestly, unless I'm asked about that, the blow up we had in the Oregonian, et cetera. It's pretty wonky stuff. But I do think some of the things that I talked about before, for example, some of the volumes of things we process, the amount of money we raise for the transportation system, I think that's important. And most people have zero idea of either of those things. I think too, some of the, when we do our customer service surveys of customers quarterly, and certainly, nobody wants to go to the DMV, right? but or wants to call the DMV, but we get, honestly, very good feedback from customers about their experience. So yeah, I think we can tell those stories. And I think we do a pretty good job of it. For example, at the legislature, I think we've done a pretty good job. Our government relations folks are fantastic. And so I think we do that. And some of the things too that are happening right now at the DMV that we are going to be, I think, trumpeting quite a bit are, so backing up just for a minute. So, the legislature and ODOT invested in the DMV about, 8 to 10 years ago with a huge computer system upgrade, right? And we managed to deliver, and this is not when I was running DMV, so this is no credit to me, but we delivered a massive state IT project on time, on budget, and doing what it was supposed to do. And it's a modern IT system. Where in the past 5 years ago, we had green screens and COBOL mainframes. And so, and now what that enables us to do is to deliver some of the things that are happening right now. So, you can go online, and if you've lost your driver's license, you can order a replacement online. In the past, you would have had to go into a field office. If it's time to renew your driver's license, if you meet some pretty basic criteria, you can renew it online. So you don't have to come into DMV, but once in 16 years, unless you have other business to do. Online knowledge testing for teens who are trying to get their permit or other people who need to take a knowledge test, that just launched about a month ago. We have a queuing system now in our field offices that has really improved customer flow. It's going to give us great data to help us manage better. And we just kicked off a project for self-serve kiosks. If the person in control of the slide deck could move one forward, we will see over there on the right, that is an example of a self-serve kiosk. It's an oversized ATM looking thing. But people, next spring, we should be piloting our first kiosks that allow people to go into like a Fred Meyer or maybe an ethnic market and be able to do some basic DMV transactions, and they'll expand over time. When we get to tolling, we expect we'll be able to issue the transponders and receive payments. You can use cash at these things. So the unbanked and people who just don't want to do credit card transactions online will be able to use these and stay away from our field offices. So we have a ton of great stuff going on. It's pretty incredible. And our IT folks and the people interacting in the business side of thing, working with our IT folks, have been doing amazing work this last couple of years, delivering all these things. That's really going to be, it is and will continue to be transformational for the way DMV operates in Oregon, which means it's transformational for our customers whom we exist to serve. So I'll be speaking to that any chance anybody gives me.
That's awesome. This is so cool.
Yeah.
The USPS has a unit that allows you to like weigh, measure, and stamp packages. And I don't understand why they don't put them in Fred Meyer's all over the place. Like it would make me so happy if they would do that. So this is fantastic. I love that you're moving in this direction.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, I was gonna just a question, comment, looking at the field office wait time, I think 20 minutes or less is pretty amazing. I have to say, last time I went in to get my real ID, I made an appointment. They had somebody directing traffic at the check-in. I was in, I was out in record time. It was the most streamless experience. It was like going to Starbucks. So thank you.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, I echo that. I did the same thing. It was awesome.
Although I didn't get any coffee.
Yeah, maybe we'll get there someday. No, I really appreciate that, and I'll pass that on. It's our fantastic staff.
Yeah.
And folks who do this, and certainly that's not the case in every office, right? We have offices with very long wait times, but all this stuff is helping. And so if we think about our key performance measure, and this is one of the questions that I have to pose to you all. Since time immemorial, the only KPM for DMV was the percentage of customers who get in and out of the field office in 20 minutes or less. That's how we measure customer service, was the field office. And we believe that there is so much more to customer service than just that. And we certainly saw this during the pandemic. It was sort of, right up in our face. And so we asked the legislature and they agreed to allow us to do a new KPM, which is an index of 4 different elements of customer service. Certainly the field office wait time, but then also how long you have to wait on the phone when you call us, how long it takes a title when you send in a title transfer because you bought a car, how long does that take? And then last, how many people are using these self-service options that we have? So the index is set up to gauge all of these things, and certainly they all interrelate, right? If our title issuance time stays low, then somebody isn't calling us so much and gumming up the phone lines, right? If people are using more online services, they don't have to come into the field office, which reduces everybody else's wait time, right? So they're all interrelated. But, the question I have for you all is, should we treat all these equally, or one or two of these really glaringly more important than the others? Because this is something we manage too. I mean, we get daily numbers. We are looking at all of these things. We are managing to this. And so it's important to know what where we need to be focusing our limited resources. So
The one question I have is on the DMV wait time. Do you track wait times at each office? Because this is just an overall wait time. And it seems like it's really important to tease out, if this is 20 minutes is the average, that means my experience, which was less than 10, is being averaged with somebody who had to wait for an hour. And so do you track that data so that you can target where you need to maybe have more coverage or?
yeah, we do. And just to be clear, I mean, that one there, percentage of customers served within 20 minutes, right? That's a goal, that's a stretch goal. We want to serve 80% within that 20 minutes right now. That's a stretch goal. But yes, so we have, well, I'll back up and say we're in transition right now. We had our old sort of wait time, pull a ticket system. And we used that forever. Now that we've moved to this lobby queuing system, we're in a bit of flux to figure out how to really gauge that time. But yes, we keep wait times now with the lobby queuing. We'll keep wait time data on every single individual office. So yes, we can see that who's served within 20 minutes, how many served within 40, over 60, right? And all those things. So we do track that. And then it's, it all becomes sort of an average of an average to get up to this, roll up to this number. But we look at that data every week of what wait times are in all the offices. Yeah.
Are you holding each of these values equal today, or are you still trying to figure out how to capture the indices?
Yeah, right now I think and this just started, right? This just got approved by the legislature. So I don't have an updated sheet on this, but I believe we're treating them all equally. And so I think that's a question, is how should we be treating them? And that's something I'm interested in, what you all happen to think about that, again, because we will manage to this. And so if we start investing more, let's say, in reducing field office wait time, then maybe we have less to invest in reducing how long you wait on the phone, right?
Seems to me that the self-service options is going to impact everything else. And it seems to me like that should be heavily weighted. And maybe I don't understand how everything fits together, but like the more people can help themselves and not interact with you on the phone or in person, the less your wait time is, the shorter the hold time is on the phone. Like, and it'll be really important for you guys from a data perspective to track, as you increase number of self-serve options, how much are those utilized? How much time would that have taken in person or on the phone that now is freed up? Like, yeah. And there's fancy maths that somebody can do, not me, but that will be really important in terms of understanding, was this the right place to spend our money? What value did we get? And telling that story so that you can then go after the next thing that is the bee in your bonnet.
Right.
Yeah, the one thing I think we need to keep in mind as we evaluate which is the more important of them is some folks are, may not have the capability of doing a self-service. So keeping in mind the equity perspective, whether it's they don't have, they're not comfortable with technology, they don't have access to computers or mobility issues to get to self-service. So I'm not sure how best to evaluate that, but I think we need to be mindful that whatever services we provide, we're still providing service to people with, unique situations.
I agree with that, but I also see this as first of all, if self-service options are online or in Fred Meyer and we're thinking about the unbanked already, the way I think about it is you're carving out space for people who do need to call in and people who do need to wait in line, and you're making that experience better for them because
Yeah.
you've carved out like all these folks that didn't really need to use that service.
No,
And
I
so
agree with 100%.
yeah, and so I appreciate that, like, we're thinking about equity in this case, but I'm assuming that the self-service is going to be in myriad like languages and is going to be in very easy to get to places. Like, we're not just going to put it at like, you know, members only country clubs. Like, it's going to be at, you know, at Fred Meyer. It's going to be at, like, as you said, at like little grocery stores and things like that, to really like be where people are. And then everyone who isn't comfortable using online services or whatever, like, and can go in person or call, you know, in terms of disability, like, just don't put these at like the top of like 4 flights of stairs. Like, make sure there's an elevator.
And how are you deciding where to put them? What's that process?
So we do it in conjunction with the vendor. So the vendor gets paid by transaction. And so they are keenly interested in getting as many people as possible to use these devices, because it only pencils out if they average so many transactions per machine over time. And so we'll do it in conjunction with them. They've got a lot of experience in other states about what works and maybe what doesn't work. But we also have, in part of the contract negotiations and in discussions with them, and they're a known vendor to us, so we work with them on other things, that, you know, we might want a few of these in places where it's probably not going to pencil out, but averaged across all of your machines statewide, it will. So if we think about more rural parts of the state, where maybe we don't have a DMV now, or maybe we shouldn't have, we do have a DMV there and maybe we shouldn't, which is the next, you know, question that I have for you about placement of offices. But, you know, can we maybe put a kiosk in that community so that people can do some routine transactions without, you know, hoofing it over to Bend or wherever to get their transaction done. So, that's how we will work those together.
It occurs to me, if you're, this is maybe the next topic, but if you're thinking about using this as a replacement for a DMV in more rural communities, it might be nice if you put one in your office and had somebody teach people how to use it so that they are comfortable when you close the office.
Yeah, and I thank you for that, Chair Smith, and I agree that it, you know, we're not just going to pull up stakes and, you know, and leave a box with a screen, you know, where we were and under cover of night, right? So these are longer term decisions, but yes, I mean, I think we need to be cognizant of people's abilities, their comfort level using something like this, and right. So I think the other question, if we could flip to that last slide, the second question I had for you was, you know, as we look at our footprint of 60 offices across the state, and we look at our current realities, which is declining budgets, and that's a probably long-term situation. We have, I'm a fan of this data point. I'm a fan of telling people this data point. The number of staff we have now is roughly the same or even a little less than the number of staff we had about 20 to 25 years ago. And we have 750,000 more Oregonians than we did at that time. So we have a challenge serving Oregonians. So this is, you know, these self-serve options, these online options, all these things we do to streamline are speaking to that, right? We need to find different ways to serve people than our field office staff. But as we look at that and some of the struggles we have with staffing that we see broadly in our society, right, and our declining budgets, you know, should we be, how do we need to be thinking about our physical footprint across the state? Because we want to be taking a hard look at that, because I would say we are in some communities that if we were doing this purely on population and population growth and some of these other things, we might not have DMV offices in all the communities where we have them now. So.
Can you maybe put up the map of the Oregon, state of Oregon with where they are located? Sabrina, I don't think you have that slide or not.
I think it was in the packet, but I
Yeah,
didn't,
it's in the packet.
yeah. That's great. Oh,
Yeah, that looks pretty good. You can kind of see. So I know that it's really, I remember a recent situation where we closed the DMV. I think it was in Central Oregon, and there was a lot of concern about it. So, I mean, I think rural communities are, that's one of the things that they are, you know, they feel pretty passionately about. I also understand the constraint, which is why if you're going to consider it, I think one of the things is it's got to be done in a way that lessens the impact to a community. You know, it's like closing a post office. It feels worse than maybe the reality, but it just feels like somebody's taken it away from you.
right.
Yeah. I don't know, Paula, in Washington, have you had any challenges with that?
Yeah, and we have a number of licensing contracts that are privately managed. Does Oregon have that?
So
I don't know what they call it, sub posts or something.
yeah. So we don't have that, Paula and Chair Smith. We have third-party contractors who do drive testing for us. They do about 3/4 of the drive tests. For dealers, vehicle dealers, there's a third-party contractor that helps them process their paperwork. So that's a private partner, public-private partnership, and then the kiosks is public-private partnership. But we don't have, for instance, I think in some states like the AAA will have a site in their office, but we do not have that here in Oregon.
Yeah, and we pay $3 more for those services, I think, if you don't go to the actual licensing office. And now that I say all this, I'm not sure that we do driver's license business there. It's more vehicle license things.
Amy, is that something that would be helpful to you if we had the ability to do that? Because maybe that's a legislative ask if it's something the legislature needs to approve.
Yeah, I think that's something that many people I think are interested in talking about that, privatizing, you know, even elements of the DMV. I heard a pitch the other day from the dealer community about maybe the ability of dealers to process vehicle paperwork, even though, even if the person didn't buy it from them, let's say it was a private party sale, that they could come to a vehicle dealer and they could process the paperwork for you for a fee. And I mean, you know, I think 10 years ago, people in my spot or others might have said, oh, you know, heck no, let's not do that. I think we need to start looking at what some other options are. A vehicle dealer, they've already got the system in place, probably, they've got the knowledge already existing, right? So, and they have certain agency relationships with DMV to kind of hold their feet to the fire. So it might actually be a model that works on the vehicle side. The licensing side makes me a little more nervous, but just in terms of identity verification and all the ways that people try to commit fraud, quite honestly. So that makes me a little more nervous, but the vehicle stuff, which is much higher volume, of course, than the licensing side.
Though, when you think about a world when us boomers are no longer in the mix, it seems like the technological approach might, using kiosks and online stuff, it's going to be so much the way of the future that people won't want or need necessarily someone to hold their hand or see a face when they make their transaction. So I don't know if it's worth the investment, but it'd be interesting to see what trends are and generational expectations.
Right. Agreed.
Just jump in, Mac.
Yeah, sorry, Amy. I love how you described maybe the resistance to change 10, 5, 20 years ago versus right how we're adapting. I have to share with this group. Yesterday I had a conversation with a business colleague, not in state government, who said you got to adapt or die, right? And I think we know that, right? You got to change. Your business model has to change and evolve. And I think that's an example. And that comment, Paula, from you made me think, like, just last week and then again today, I stepped inside a snowplow simulator that we are using to train our staff, because one, it's too high a risk to put somebody into a snowplow that's never driven that piece of equipment before in live traffic. So where can we use technology to help limit that risk? So for whatever it's worth, like I love that, like DMV, and I think Amy, through your STP, right, having a technology framework, if you will, a tool that allows you to explore these new areas. I don't know, it's kind of inspiring, frankly, because we're seeing that technology evolution now, I think it being embraced by your organization very differently than it was when you tried to implement STP early on, and just the fear. So anyway, just a huge shout out to you always, but it's coming up more and more for sure.
Yeah, thank goodness for the foresight 10 years ago or 8 years. Yeah, it's about 10 years ago when, people way before my time started, working towards that investment and that launch and the thoughtful way and the really rigorous, disciplined way that this agency implemented that IT program as frankly a model for state government. So
Tell that story.
yeah.
Yes. Don't be the employment department, be the DMV. I think it's challenging closing shops. I don't know.
Yeah, I always tell my folks when I was doing government relations work for ODOT and represented DMV, no legislator ever asked me, would you close that DMV in my town, in my district? It was always, could you open a DMV in my town or my district? So, but I think it's, many people will say about government, you need to run more like a business. And if we look at a place like a Cave Junction, or maybe a Milton Freewater, do we really belong there, considering the proximity of other offices, the population, et cetera? Would we run a business that way? But we're talking about bringing in a consultant to help us look, to think about how we plan for long-term, like what should our footprint be? And maybe it's more offices, right? I mean, but we would need more staff then, so.
Well,
Maybe it's
is
more
there-
offices with kiosks in them.
but is
But
there a
doing
way, or is there a way to like join forces with other state government offices? Like, are we co-locating with like DEQ, like air emissions, or I don't know what else, employment offices or things like that, so that you can get like the benefits of like, I don't know, like a shared space or shared personnel or things like that?
So we do a little bit of co-location now, so especially with like ODOT, right, other parts of ODOT. A lot of it does come down to the staffing questions. So, you know, we have a couple of offices where they are 1-person offices, which I think just quite honestly is not a good idea to have a 1-person office. But we have, you know, 2- and 3-person offices. Well, if somebody's on vacation and then somebody calls in sick, it's kind of hard to keep that office open. And then we have these ad hoc closures, right? So, yeah, it's a challenge.
So how many offices do we have that are, you know, less than 5 staff? Or I don't know what the right number is, but that kind of like, if 1 or 2 people are out, you have to close.
Yeah. So it's a great question. I can get you a list. What I will say is pretty much every morning, our office managers and regional managers are up probably around 6:30 a.m. texting and calling each other about who's called out sick, how are we going to move people around amongst the various offices in a cluster to try to keep all those offices open, even with a skeletal staff, and then moving staff around among those offices. So an example might be, you know, the Salem area. We have North Salem, South Salem, we have Staten, we have Woodburn. They're all sort of in rough proximity. And so there's this movement of staff back and forth to try to keep those offices open. And then sometimes it's just, you know what, it's just not going to work today. We need to close one of those, or close for lunch, or open late, or close early. So yeah, we're making those decisions day to day. And again, with the staffing problems that, again, all of our economy is seeing, right? Those are some of our challenges too.
Well, it seems there's an opportunity in those areas where you've got several offices in generally within a reasonable distance to consider closing 1 or 2 of those and consolidating, so that you don't have that morning round robin, which seems really inefficient. You know, I guess I was thinking, well, you know, the ones that might be on the list are the really rural ones, like, as you say, Cape Junction or whatever. But it sounds to me like efficiency wise, it's maybe even in the more metro areas.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that could be, I mean, I wonder about Salem, right? We have North and South Salem. Should we just have one big office in Salem? You know, we have, if you look down in the lower right, that's our Portland metro area groups of offices. Now those are, I will tell you, every one of those is a very busy office. So, but do we find a much bigger space and do kind of a mega office, a couple of mega offices instead of the 6 or 8 or whatever we have in there? Those are some of the things that we're hoping a consultant can help us work through and think through. And again, with always that focus being, how do we best serve Oregonians?
Well, it looks like we're kind of getting close to the end of our time today. Does anybody have anything else for Amy, or good of the order, or questions?
I just really appreciate the presentation and learning about the work you guys are doing. So thank you for that. And I just want to make sure that as we think about places that ODOT runs and has control over, where people are to tell stories, I think the DMV is a great example of that.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the story of how we fix the suspension problem. I mean, we don't want to talk about a mistake, but let's talk about the solution. You know, I haven't heard anything about it since it was a big splash in the newspaper, other than internal conversation. So
Or like how 10 years ago the legislature was prescient and you know, invested in technology, and now you can make appointments online and you can say, I need a real ID, and get like ferried into the special line at the DMV, so you're there for under 10 minutes. Like, those are really like meaningful things that nobody will know about unless we tell them.
Great, thank you.
All right, I don't know, Lee, if you have any recap for today, or
I think, Commissioner, the biggest recap was just really on maybe bringing back some proposals on how do we bring back items to the CIAC to make sure that we're kind of closing the loop and that we have, you know, ongoing discussions, but that we are better tracking as a group, kind of where discussions have gone internally and then what the right touch points are to bring them back.
That's great. I agree with that. That sounds good. So our next meeting is, I guess I could figure that out ahead of time, but when is our next meeting?
November 15th.
Thank you. And I think in the interest of the weather, let's do it virtually if that's okay with people. Yeah. All right.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Well, thanks, everyone. Any last comments or thoughts before we call it a day? We have a minute left.
Good meeting.
We should tell Amy that Linda Beckman or Beckens, I think it was a member of this group when we first started. So you were well represented when we first started.
Right. I forgot about that. Yeah, Linda Buchan, she's on my our leadership team here. So thank you. And thanks for the opportunity to come and talk about DMV and brief you up. So appreciate
Appreciate it, Amy.
Thank you.
For all your great work and leadership. It's you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
All right.
Hi, everyone.
Okay. Have a great day.